Who is the best Spider-Man? There's not really a right or wrong answer to this. After all, film is subjective at the end of the day. Sure, there are some objective qualities that can form the subjective opinion of the film itself, but ultimately Spider-Man is supposed to be the hero that could be you. He's supposed to be relatable, and what different people find to be relatable is going to be unique. Just as what people enjoy in movies is going to be unique regardless of the objective factors that make that up. But I'm gonna make a thesis here. Spider-Man 2002, Tobey Maguire's very first Spider-Man film, is the most important and influential Spider-Man film of them all. Do I have your attention? Alright, let's elaborate. The late 90s through early 2000s were a strange time for comic book movies. It seemed that DC and Warner Brothers had screwed the pooch with Batman and Robin, but Marvel superheroes seemed to be having something of an emergence in Hollywood, with Blade and the X-Men, and Spider-Man would go on to follow. Now back then, comic book movies weren't quite like they are today. There was no guarantee of a faithful depiction of these characters, be it their costumes or be it their personalities. More larger-than-life and outrageous concepts tended to be toned down a little bit for the movie-going audience. A prime example of this is the appearance of the X-Men, as the iconic X-Men looks were traded in for black leather uniforms. As a matter of fact, everything seemed to be black leather. Blade, I mean, I guess that's appropriate. The X-Men, Batman. This was not really a time for the colorful superhero, and yet Spider-Man would be making his big screen debut. So the result could have been pretty much anything. So looking at Spider-Man face value, what this character looks like, how he appears, is very much the visual embodiment of what this film was at the time. As in a superhero film climate where everyone was sporting black leather, in comes Spider-Man. And it's not just that he was red and blue, it was the fact that while Spider-Man clearly had the Hollywood treatment, he was immediately recognizable as to what Spider-Man is in the comic books and other media. I've seen people on Twitter trying to claim that this suit looks nothing like the comic books, but people will just say any old shit for clout, won't they really? Spider-Man was also a massive showcase of what special effects could do at the time. Comic book superheroes are often associated with thrills and spills and big action set pieces, so it's safe to say that Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2002 had its work cut out for it. Things back then weren't like what they are today, where, you know, if you can dream it, you can make it happen through the use of computer imagery. There were certain limitations, which Spider-Man 2002 did not shy away from, opening up with a big spectacular musical overture showcasing many different special effects, a completely computer-generated opening credit sequence, and yeah, it shows some of its age, but it's also pretty stylish as well. It wasn't so much the CGI in isolation so much as it was how they utilized it that made this work. Moving into the film itself, it definitely draws less of its beats and inspiration from the respective Blade and X-Men movies. Moreover, it takes most of its inspiration from 1978's Superman, which makes sense as there are quite a few similarities between Superman and Spider-Man. Both of these characters carry a great deal of American idealism, so going with the Richard Donner approach definitely made sense for this one.
Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 is so overrated. One of the greatest critics of all time, Doug Walker, said that these films were cheesy and hokey. Thanks to his brilliant assessment, this is now my opinion as well, because the film is so corny and cheesy.
So you want to know something that aggravates me is when people mistake idealism and innocence for being cheesy and corny. Going for this tone was a conscious decision. Sam Raimi clearly wanted just as much to pay tribute to Spider-Man as he did adapt it. Even in the early 2000s when this released, this film was very optimistic, very idealistic, and very innocent. Peter Parker didn't want to get with Mary Jane in this film because she's a woman he has a rich emotional connection with. They both have the exact same origins. She's very useful to the plot, you see. She very much ties into the greater threat. No, she's She's been the girl next door his entire life, and she was probably the cause of his very first erection. A major theme of this film is innocence. Wow, what a weird couple of points to put back to back like that. But in very much like the first 40 or so minutes of this film, Peter Parker is that young idealistic fella. His biggest aspirations are that he wants to impress the girl next door with a fancy car. He's awkward, he's goofy, and pretty much daydreaming throughout his entire life. And there's very much this sort of sickly, sweet, homely quality to all of the Peter Parker scenes at home prior to becoming Spider-Man, which is where the whole theme of innocence comes into play. It's childhood innocence. Peter Parker is a kid in this movie. You might not believe it given Tobey Maguire's age at the time, but this was par the course back then. It's called suspension of disbelief, guys. Come on, use it. You have it, use it. Don't be lazy. I, for one, you know, I am a zoomer and all, but I find it very easy to look past the fact that most of these actors are in their 30s. Okay, this film does show its age in some places. A lot of these sequences at high school almost feel like a Blink-182 music video. But I say that in the most nice and loving way possible because I genuinely love that, and I would be more than happy for us to return to that style of filmmaking, please and thank you. We very much juxtaposed the homely and innocent life of Peter Parker with the life of Norman Osborn, where business comes first and human safety be damned. He's no everyman trying to save money for a car to impress the girl. He's fulfilling weaponry contracts for a military organization. And where the characters of Norman Osborn and Peter Parker kind of overlap is A, in their interest in science, and B, Harry Osborn, the daughter? The son of Norman. What the fuck is wrong with me today? Who also happens to be Peter's very best friend. All of this is breezily established in the very first act of the film. I'm genuinely surprised by how quickly this swishes by. It doesn't feel like it misses anything though, like it's a very breezily paced film. Now, all of the beats of the Spider-Man origin story are here, with the one and only omission being Peter Parker creating mechanical web shooters, but if anything, that's fine, it streamlines the process, he gets all of his powers from the Spider-Bite, whatever, no biggie. But that's really the only deviation here. I think making Spider-Man 2002 the most comic book faithful superhero Hollywood movie adaptation of its time. I mean, there's other little things coming up, but we'll talk about those in a bit. All of the story beats are there, Peter Parker's origins, Spider-Bite, death of Uncle Ben, but all of these things are absolutely drenched in moments that enrich the characters, such as before getting bit by the radioactive spider, Peter Parker is taking photography of Mary Jane. And he's being all shy and awkward, and the way he discovers his powers happens to be in relation to beating up Flash Thompson, which Uncle Ben finds out about, which leads to the great power, great responsibility speech, which is a major theme in this movie. The power, the responsibility. Which obviously leads to Peter making a poor judgment call at the wrestling scene, which, might I say, is just brilliant cinema. Just everything about the way that Sam Raimi directs this movie, and this scene in particular, is just absolutely bristling with energy and atmosphere, raw enthusiasm and excitement, and it just feels so very American. Just crowds and crowds of people going absolutely nuts over a guy getting beaten up in a cage. It's just like you follow that up then with Peter getting stitched up out of money, and then a security guard getting pissed off at an ordinary citizen for not chasing down a robber. It just does not get more American than that. Oh, fuck me, I'm in trouble. And then, of course, we have the death of Uncle Ben, where Peter Parker effectively loses that sense of innocence. He has to be a responsible adult now. He no longer has Uncle Ben to look out for him. And he's learned the hard way that this dream teen world he's living in, where he has wet dreams about Mary Jane Watson and wants to buy a car and stuff, it has its consequences. He has to get his head in the real world now and see where there are going to be consequences, and not just for him, but for the people that he loves, and he sees why that's unfair. And then, of course, we also have Norman Osborn being pressured into becoming the Green Goblin effectively, acting irresponsibly. These two actions of irresponsibility transform Peter Parker and Norman Osborn into their respective roles in this movie, the protagonist and the antagonist. Osborn out to seek revenge on the world that pressured him into becoming the Green Goblin, and Parker out to make things right, to amend for his previous mistake. Two ideologies at war with one another, with all of their loved ones and New York City in the crossfire. Now, of course, you've got to remember that Peter Parker is a teenager in this story, and there's always the temptation to act irresponsibly, to abandon the path of righteousness and just have what he wants. And Peter Parker does have that inclination, when as Spider-Man, against any and all better judgment, he has a little smoochy with the girl of his dreams, even though she's dating his best friend at this time. It's not like a serious relationship or anything, don't worry, Peter Parker's not a horrible person in this instance. But Spider-Man is a human, he's not this unbreakable force. He's a guy with wants and desires. He doesn't want to always go the hard way about things. Also, that kiss scene is just iconic. I mean, like, Jesus. It basically just summarizes all of Peter's kind of growing up, becoming a man, the loss of innocence and the blossoming of Peter Parker and Mary Jane. And if you can guess what the rain is a metaphor for, congratulations, you're pretty fucking gross. No shame, so am I. But it's just nice to see that there's more to Peter Parker than the mission. He's definitely one of the more human superheroes we've had since 1978 Superman on the big screen. And this does get tested throughout the film, as Norman Osborn does try to extend an olive branch to Peter, making the offer for Spider-Man and the Green Goblin to become something of a duo to work together. The Green Goblin constantly trying to break Spider-Man. Not kill him, but destroy everything that he represents. Sure, there's incredible stunts and action going on in the scenes of Spider-Man fighting the Green Goblin, but every one of them past that initial first meet represents the Green Goblin testing Peter Parker. Make no mistake, unlike a lot of the 70s stuff that Marvel pushed out, this isn't just a stunt show spectacular. Come to think of it, they probably shouldn't have relied on that back in the 70s either, because, I mean, like, they had a fucking budget of, what, $10? Put it this way, if you want a stunt show spectacular out of this, good news, you're in luck. But if you want something more, also good news. You're also in luck. It is the best of both worlds, as every action sequence plays into this thematically. We've also got the scene where Norman Osborn uncovers Peter Parker's identity as Spider-Man, which really ramps up the stakes because the Green Goblin is a massive threat in this movie. And knowing the secret identity of Spider-Man is something that the Green Goblin gleefully weaponizes. He takes full advantage of this, attacking everyone that Peter Parker loves. Spider-Man is still idealistic, endlessly committed to doing the right thing, so the Green Goblin puts Spider-Man in a position where there is no good decision. There is no right thing, as he has both Mary Jane Watson, the girl of Peter Parker's dreams, and a cable car full of little children suspended upon the Brooklyn Bridge, and he's prepared to drop them both. The ultimate test of Spider-Man's ideology, and one which it surely cannot withstand. Surely there is no right decision here. Whoever Spider-Man saves, somebody else dies. Which makes the Green Goblin such a complex threat for this film, and he works Peter Parker out at every turn. And if you think that is all good on a thematic level and a writing level and everything, can we also just pair that up with Willem Dafoe, the perfect casting for this role, the perfect performance for this role? Holy shit, it's like Christmas for Green Goblin fans.
Yeah, but his costume looks like a Power Ranger.
Yeah, and you look like a dumpy little piece of shit. Fuck you. I don't care. I think this costume looks great. Just get out of my face. Thank you. So on one hand, we have some provocative imagery for comic book fans. We've got Spider-Man's girlfriend suspended above the Brooklyn Bridge by the Green Goblin. Oh fuck, are they going to do what we think we're going to do? We probably shouldn't take a happy ending for granted right now. See? Upping the stakes. Upping the stakes for those in the know. It's rewarding to be a Spider-Man fan at this moment. But in this moment, Spider-Man kind of risks it all and goes out of his way to save them both, and it's a seemingly impossible task. Spider-Man is desperately clinging on to his chances of saving both Mary Jane and the cable car full of children. And it's especially not easy when the Green Goblin is constantly going after you, a militant enemy armed to the teeth. But Spider-Man is a New Yorker, and New Yorkers have each other's backs. As citizens on the bridge distract the Green Goblin by pelting trash at him, yelling at him in defense of Spider-Man, and then two other New Yorkers move a barge beneath the cable car to catch it. This scene is not just Spider-Man versus the Green Goblin, this is New York versus the Green Goblin. And this is the point where Spider-Man 2002 cements itself as the most important superhero film ever made. So let's go on a quick tangent. Post-911 cinema. It tends to be quite a nihilistic thing, where a lot of different cinematographers or filmmakers will just use kind of 9/11-esque imagery to evoke feelings of terror and horror in the audience. Apocalyptic events that carry that kind of imagery, where it's not done for thrills and excitement, it's done to really rattle and shake the audience in a really bad way. Spider-Man 2002 was one of the earliest examples of post-9/11 cinema, but in this case it was utilized very differently. Shortly after 9/11, a lot of Americans, and a lot of New Yorkers in particular, were living in fear. It was a frightening and cynical time. So, given the time frame, having this scene here of regular everyday New Yorkers helping Spider-Man to take down a militant threat because they're all together and they're all united and they have each other's backs, that was a beautiful moment. For just a brief moment, that New York mentality, that attitude, that sass, was all back together as though 9/11 never even happened. I mean, okay, of course it did. I don't want to speak like flippantly on that or anything, but you get what I'm saying here. It was a moment of pure movie magic escapism, and it kind of brought the whole Spider-Man experience together as kind of this symbol of everything America can represent, all of that ideology, hope, truth, justice, the American way, and the tale of a young man growing up in this world. He's tested one last time when he's beaten to a bloody pulp by Norman Osborn. I kind of like that. I like the fact that when all is lost for the Green Goblin, he just resorts to beating the ever-loving shit out of Peter. And we see him once again try to manipulate Peter, reaching out as though he's the father figure that Peter Parker once lost, but we get that reiteration that Peter already had a father whose name was Uncle Ben. And in his last act of vengeance and cruelty, the Green Goblin's plan backfires and he gets a glider in the fucking balls. But that's not really a win for Peter Parker, because Norman Osborn still meant something to him, and that's also his best friend's dad. So it kind of ends on a bittersweet note there, and then there's one final test. Mary Jane confesses love for Peter Parker at Harry Osborn's father's funeral. That's a weird time to do that, but okay. And Peter Parker rejects her because it's no longer about what he wants. It's no longer about the girl next door. He's duty-bound for bigger things. He's able to help people, so he should. There'll be enemies, there'll be dangers, and he doesn't want Mary Jane to be a part of that, even though she totally is. And our final shot is Peter Parker atop the Empire State Building, the American flag flying, swinging at us. An all-American end to an all-American piece of cinema. It's fucking beautiful, man. Like the film or not, you can't deny that it definitely holds a very important place in the history of American cinema. And if you try to deny that, you're gonna look like a fucking 10-year-old. I'm just gonna straight up say it. I'm just gonna be honest about it. You know, have whatever opinion you want about this film. But the fact is, it is one very important superhero film. But for me, this stuff is only even just scratching the surface of why this film is brilliant. I haven't even talked about the scenes at the Daily Bugle and the perfect casting of J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. This film just has so much to give, and I highly recommend that you all go back and watch it again. Yes, maybe some of the dialogue pays just a little too much homage to the style of a classic comic book. Maybe it doesn't entirely feel natural to how people really speak in real life, but thematically, it all really holds up. And it's just, in my opinion, it's an incredible film. But I pass it over to you guys. Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below is a link tree, which links to websites where you can help support this channel, which we really need to keep the lights on over here. Now, with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, guys, and have a great day.